Hello, I'm Chris Flischer, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flischer. Hey, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. My name is Chris Flischer. I'm an astrologer, and I'm here today to talk to you about an interesting subject. Those of you who've been watching me over the years or so that I've been on the show have noticed that I've spoken about individual planets, I've spoken about individual houses, I've spoken about individual signs, all of which are necessary components of the great science and art of astrology. And today I'm going to talk about what happens when two planets become entwined in some sort of a conflict that creates an internal and external kind of trauma or dynamic in the world stage. And this is what was called mundane astrology. When I talk about mundane astrology, I don't mean that it's boring. I mean that it is...
I'm sorry, Chris. Can we start again? I just need somebody to come in here and look at this monitor while I level that camera.
Oh, okay.
It's not right. It looks like you're rolling downhill.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Hang on 1 second. Hey, can I borrow somebody for a second real quick? It's hard to tell on this monitor because it chops the sides, but there I can see it.
Is it maybe the table's crooked?
No, it's not. It's definitely the camera. Where it's this tripod.
I can compensate by the
Level? Can you look in there? I can't tell on this monitor.
Is there a leveling?
There is, but it's clearly off because we have this problem with a lot of shows.
No other way. Right. No, come back down on that side. A little more. Right about there. I think you got it.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
All right, I've got you down here.
You guys going to reset the counter, right?
I will, yep. All right, ready in 5?
Yep.
4, 3, 2.
Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flischer. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And I'm going to talk about astrology today in particular. Those of you who've watched my show on a regular basis know that I've gone into sort of always try to present things in an educational format to sort of enlighten you as to the logic of astrology, why astrology really works, because it really does. We can look out over the stage of the world and we can look at individual charts. We'll see exactly things happening when they're supposed to happen. And it's remarkable in that regard. When I think about this, when I say mundane, mundane is a term that's used within the astrology community, meaning that it applies to all people. These are sort of planetary constructs and planetary themes that everybody may experience. So that rather than being just a Gemini experiencing something or a Sagittarius or a Taurus, these apply to all people. And this is sort of how astrologers rationalize the current path of society, political realms, and all sorts of evolutionary patterns that we see within the realm of astrology. Because when we have certain planets in certain areas of the chart, we see progress, or we don't see progress, happening as a result of the placement of the planets. Now, astrology is an esoteric science, it's an esoteric art, as you know, and it is based on the basics of it is based on geometry. So we have the world, we have the circle of the universe as 360 degrees. When those 360 degrees are part of our background, our format, that's the playground from which we work off of, our palette rather, we see that there is a necessary construct of when planets are in weird or unusual angles to each other. Now, in astrology, the general rules are that there are angles that are considered to be difficult and challenging, and there are angles that are considered to be harmonious. And when we have difficult and challenging angles, such as a 90-degree angle, which is considered a square, just like that, 90-degree angle square. Anywhere you look in a house or anything in architecture, this is where that same thread runs through. Where you see that two things happening, the 90 degrees, there is a tension point at that spot. And that's what happens in astrology. So when two planets are in 90-degree square to each other in the wheel of the universe, of the cosmos, within our local celestial neighborhood, we begin to see events that relate to those characteristics that those planets are responsible for. So, to make this a little more clear, as I said, astrology is a mathematical construct based on geometry. So when we think about geometry, we know that it is based on a circle. There's 360 degrees in a circle. So when we have planets that are at 90 degrees of that circle, which is 1/4 of the circle, so you have north, south, east, west, when you have something in a corner, in a square like that, we tend to see challenges, and we tend to see conflict, and we see things that require our attention. And the reason it's so fascinating is because when we look out at current events, we will see these types of events happen with precision based on the planets that are there at the time. So right now, we are in the midst of a very unusual political season in the United States of America and in the world. We see a lot of conflict. We see a lot of diametrically opposed ideas. We see two different factions of where we want the world to go, or where people think the world should go. And I want to just preface this by saying these are not necessarily my opinions. They're not the opinions of this station or any organization. They are simply what I would call cultural, astrological observations of what is going on and why we're seeing what we're seeing. When we look back in history, we will find similar patterns happening. There's a fabulous book out called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, and he was a guest on my show back in 2008. You can get to my archives on turningthewheel.com, and you'll hear what he has to say. And he traces the movement of the outer planets to significant social events and social upheavals. So he'll track where the French Revolution was, where the Russian Revolution was, where all these major events happen. And they are always tied to the outer planets. When I refer to the outer planets, I refer to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. When those are the outer planets, and they're considered outer planets, they're considered to be what's called transpersonal because they apply to all of us. Those are the mundane planets, the outer planets. And because they move so slowly, their track through their celestial path around the sun is so slow, they tend to reflect huge social, cultural, political, and evolutionary patterns that we see as we look back over the course of human history, and we look at the span of human history. So when we look at that and we see, wow, this is when such and such happened, this is when such and such happened, we can begin to postulate what might happen, or at least explain why certain events are happening when they're happening. Why do certain characters rise to the surface at certain times in our lives? Why are we in the midst of such an unusual election season like we've never seen before? This is because we are in the midst of what is called a square between two powerful and influential planets in the outer realm of our local celestial neighborhood. The first planet I'm going to talk about is Saturn. Saturn is currently in Sagittarius, and that is right on the ascendant of the United States. Now, when I spoke about the chart layout, perhaps you know what the ascendant is. The ascendant is where the sun is at the time of birth, and we attribute the time of birth of the United States to be July 4th, 1776, 5:08 p.m. in Philadelphia, PA. That's referred to as the Sibley chart, S-I-B-L-E-Y. You look up Sibley chart on the web, you'll get a much better explanation than my time allows me here. But anyway, what that does is that puts Sagittarius and it puts Saturn right now, currently, on the ascendant of the United States. Saturn, as an archetypal symbolic representation of a characteristic, espouses, completely represents duty, devotion, diligence, responsibility, and sort of doing the tough things involved. This is a time when Saturn represents the toughness. A tough choice has to be made. We either have to go high or we have to go low. This is sort of the kind of opportunity that Saturn presents to the United States. Having Saturn on the ascendant means we are being forced literally being pushed into a situation where a decision must be made that may not be easy. It may not be easy for us to make, and yet we know we have to do it. It's kind of like paying your taxes. It's kind of like getting up and going to work in the morning. It's like, doing the right thing. This is what it really comes down to. We may not always like doing the right thing, but we know we have to do it. It's like going to get your teeth cleaned or going to get a cavity filled. Nobody enjoys that, but we do it because we know it's good for our health. Getting a physical is the same thing. Plenty of things that we don't like, and yet we know we do them for self-preservation. They are the right thing to do. Saturn represents that characteristic in the astrology chart. That is the archetypal, symbolic representation of what Saturn is. And Saturn now is currently in this position in the United States chart where it's right on our ascendant, meaning that it is bearing down on us and forcing us to make a decision. Now, before I go any further, I want you to understand that these planets do not have any magnetic beam that comes down. These are symbolic in terms. This is a framing that may be difficult for you to understand, but you've got to sort of stretch your imagination and think of this in terms of philosophy. Think of it in terms of social trends. Think of it in terms of timing. These are all representative terms that apply very crisply and accurately to the positions of the planets because we can see where they are located in the world and how they are impacting us as individuals. If I were to look at any individual chart, your chart or anybody else's chart, and I was able to cast it correctly according to birthplace, date, and time, I could see where Saturn was in your chart, and I'd see where you're being asked to step up to the plate. This is the thing. This is sort of stepping up to the plate. It's the universe and your inner sense of self asking you to make a decision about what is the right thing to do. Saturn represents the right thing to do. It's about duty, it's about responsibility, it's about diligence, it's the taskmaster, it's the lord of the task. It's the great Chronos, it's the timekeeper. It's the represented in astrology as Capricorn is the sign that it rules, and it represents this stage of being the person who is stoic, who steps in and saves the ball game. Maybe it's the bottom of the ninth, 2 men on, 2 outs, and you're Big Papi stepping up to the plate and you're ready to swing that bat, and all the world is on you watching you. It's the responsible thing to do. Boom, the ball goes out of the park, the game is won, and he's done his duty. That's a metaphor for what Saturn represents in the astrology chart. So again, think of Saturn as that taskmaster. Saturn is sort of like your mother telling you to clean up your room on Saturday morning when you want to go out as a kid and play instead. Got to clean up your room. Once you clean up your room and you get that done, boom, you can have the reward afterwards. Because Saturn does provide rewards. Without that forcing function, we might not get things done. It's just like going to college or high school. You got to pass the exam in order to get the grade. You got to pass the test. You got to hand the papers in. You got to attend the classes. You got to go to the lectures. You got to do all those tasks in order to secure that grade. If you do all those tasks diligently, then you get the grade at the end that shows that you, yes, have accomplished something. Then you go through college, you get a diploma. You get a master's degree, the same thing. But those require you to jump through certain hoops, so to speak, figuratively speaking. Those hoops are what Saturn provides. They are the structure that says this is what you must do in order to advance forward in your life. And this is how we're all faced with this. This is nothing new to us. We've all got these challenges in our life. And astrology totally captures what this is all about. It's all about we are a composite of assets and a composite of liabilities. We want to work on our assets. We want to, espouse our assets, leverage our assets, and then work on our liabilities to make ourselves better. This is our real, true purpose in life. So that's a summation of Saturn in this particular sense of the world and where we are right now. So Saturn is a key player. It's always there. It's going to move around the chart. You'll see it in times of every 7 years. Based on seven. If you look at your life over the course of your life, you looking at the birth as the point. Look at where you were at 7. Look at where you were at 14. Look at where you were at 21. Look at where you were at 28. You would see significant events happening, especially at 28, which is called the Saturn return. That's when Saturn returns back to where it was at the moment of birth. Anytime there's a return, it's a renewal of that same theme. So what happens when people get 28 or around that age, and it's a broad range because it's a slow-moving planet, as I mentioned. What happens at that age? People tend to graduate college, they get advanced degrees, they get married, they have children. All of those big life milestone events happen at 28. Now, when I was if you go back on my archives and you see my episode on Saturn, you'll get a much more accurate description and much more in-depth description of what Saturn brings to the table. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when planets are in a square to each other, a 90-degree square, we tend to see something that requires resolution. We see resolution at that point. Right now, Saturn is in a square to the planet Neptune. Now Neptune, so that means that they're 90 degrees apart. If we were to look out in the sky, we'd see them 90 degrees apart if we were to overlay a giant circle on the planet and look at where it was astrologically. And this is all clearly evident. You can find lots of information on my website, as you saw earlier, or on the web. It's all there for you to see. Now, Neptune, as an interesting subject, takes 164 years to go around the planet, so it's a very slow-moving planet, and so therefore, same as all the other outer planets, its influence is long and generational, okay? Neptune is the planet of the psychologist. It's the planet of illusion. It's the planet of delusion. Okay, delusion. It's the planet of theater. It's the planet that represents fantasy. It's the planet that represents, photography, film, escapism, all of those things. Drugs is another characteristic of Neptune. But it's also the realm of the psychologist, meaning this is sort of the realm of the subconscious. So we have Neptune as a character. It is a planet that was discovered, only back in the 1800s. I think it was 1839 or 1838. Don't quote me on that. You can go to the web and get that answer. I haven't got it at my fingertips. But it represents, I know what it means archetypally. And when I say archetypally, I mean sort of what are the characteristics represented by this planet? Where is it in your particular chart? It's most important. Because when you know where that is in your chart, that's where you might have problems of not being quite sure of yourself. This is where illusion, delusion comes in. And delusion is believing one thing about yourself or perhaps the world or the situation when that really is not reality. This is where we come down to that spot of time where we say, am I really seeing clearly? Am I seeing what I expect to see clearly? When this planet exudes its influence, and we feel it on a mass cultural, as I said, mundane level, then we find out how and why, and it explains quite a bit about why things look the way they look. Neptune is currently in Pisces. That is the sign that it rules, okay? And it has not been there in 164 years or 168 years since it was last there, okay? Last time it was there was 1848, 1850, when there was a huge movement of spirituality. The Transcendentalists came alive then. The Theosophists came alive then. Madame Blavatsky was very big in the world. And so this whole realm of higher thinking, higher thought, higher purpose, sort of this idea of entering into the esoteric realm was all very prominent then. A very highly charged period. And now we're back in that time again. And the reason I'm bringing it up today is because it is really indicative of sort of what we're seeing in the United States political arena right now. It's very, very clear. We've got two characters, and I know the world has a lot going on, and I am an American, so I'm focused on America. But because the United States plays such a large role on the stage of the planet, and very influential in many ways, we have to look to the United States as a harbinger, a beacon, a messenger of what is to come. And how events play out on our stage will drastically impact the events of other events in the world as humanity, society, civilization moves forward. Now, I know I'm talking in very high, lofty terms, and I'm asking you to sort of stretch with me to understand what I'm talking about. When we look at these ideas, we see basic philosophical concepts that come to light under the influence of these planets. When we see responsibility, which is Saturn, coming into a square with Neptune, which represents illusion and delusion, what do we think about at that point in time? What would we see if we were to ascribe those characteristics to candidates today? How would we envision that? Fog is a perfect example of what Neptune's like. When you think of the old black and white film noir films of the 1930s and 40s, I always think of the old Hitchcock films where the fog is rising off the water on a dusky London evening and this rain is pouring down. That's a very Neptunian kind of characteristic. That's very much, Hitchcock was very much of a Neptunian character. He espoused that Neptunian quality in his work. He was an escapist, like all filmmakers are. Filmmakers have a very strong prevalence of Neptune in their charts, meaning that it is probably in their 10th house or their 5th house. You can see why they are the way they are. But filmmakers and directors are very, very much Neptunian people. So when we think of fog and illusion, and it is the realm of surreality, it is the world of non-reality. And by same token, it is the world of reality as it is now played out in the television world. What does reality TV look like to you? Is it the real thing? Is it the real thing? I know for a fact it is not the real thing. I was on a reality TV show back in 2005 called Trading Spouses. And it was, at the time I was with, I was living with, I lived for 6 days. A woman from Louisiana came to live with me who was an arch fundamentalist Christian, and I was an astrologer, so obviously there was going to be some sort of, not conflict, but just perhaps not agreeance, okay? And that was filmed over the course of a week. Everything I did was filmed during that time. Everything she did, everybody else did at the time was filmed. And then at the end of the filming, they took all that film back to the cutting floor and they ran it through an editing process and cut and pasted pieces of that film to make it into something that it wasn't. This is why I know firsthand experience, and you can get to that video segment on my website, chrisflisher.com or turningthewheel.com. They're both, that episode is on there. You can get to it and you can watch it. It's turningofthewheel.com, turningofthewheel.tv are my websites where you can find that. And there it is on the bottom of the screen. I encourage you to watch it because you'll see that what is being represented in that film footage is not reality, because they took the film and they did what's called creative editing. Now, creative editing is a wonderful talent. My hat is off to anybody who does film editing. It's a very long, arduous, laborious task that requires concentration and an overall picture of what's going on. But when I saw that film played back, I said, this is not at all what happened. This is completely manufactured. This has been edited to reflect a certain tone, a tone that was not accurately represented by the week that I spent, okay? It was slanted, because when you take all the film in the world you can take and you select people's faces, you know, I may have been, you know, making a face at my dog who was not coming in. I may have said, come over here, or whatever, and I had a frown on my face. They may have used that expression for me in response to something that that other person may have said. So what I'm saying is that it's an illusion. This is what film is all about. And Neptune is very much that way. Neptune rules this realm of film, okay? So when we have a reality TV star delving into the realm of illusion, delusion, and sort of this realm of self-contained lack of grounding in some way. And this is not, as I said, this is not a political, this is simply an observation of what I've seen. When you have someone who enters the stage in a fog, in a silhouette, in a fog, we know that this is kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain. Never mind that man behind the curtain is in the Wizard of Oz. This is very similar to what we're seeing on one side of the political spectrum right now. Okay? So there's this very strong Neptunian characteristic right now. It's this illusion. This is what I am. This is, and do we know what this person is? Do we have any idea what this person is like? This is a Neptunian character lost in a fog of Neptunian realm. It's that watery, vacuous, untouchable realm, which is where a person can cast themselves in a certain light that you wouldn't normally see. That is perhaps not reality. If this person had to walk around with a camera all day long and all of his telephone calls were taped, we might see a different person. But what we see on the stage is led us to believe a certain type of character. Now, getting back to Saturn, on the other side of the political spectrum, we have someone who is uber responsible. We have someone who has put in countless hours in the area of trying to get the country moving forward. This has got nothing to do with popularity. This has got nothing to do with political preferences. It has nothing to do with this station. It is completely an astrological, educational observation of what's going on. And it helps explain, believe it or not, it helps explain why we're seeing what we're seeing. So we're seeing duty, one side of the party, We've seen someone who's been there loyally, dogged, hard work, 40 years of experience, doing the right thing, trying to get things done, regardless of what you may feel about them or how they've gotten there, this is what we would represent as duty. This is Saturn in Sagittarius. This is a Saturnian kind of person doing the right thing, behind the scenes, working, working, working. On the other spectrum, in the square, we see Neptune. Neptune is this elusive, vacuous, lost in the clouds, lost in a sense of a surreal world where a reality isn't there, even though the word reality is what this person uses to describe themselves, or one of the reasons they became so famous. So you can see the conundrum here. You can see this natural lining up of this natural cosmic phenomenon that is just phenomenal. It is just so incredibly accurate that we see this. This is a time where we see illusion coming into square, into challenging aspect with responsibility. So on one hand of the side of the story, we've got duty, and duty is stay the course, keep things going, provide permanence, provide stability, be steadfast, get the hard work done. It's not easy doing what we're doing. Get this done. On the other side, we have a bag of empty promises. We have a vacuous, no policy, complete, sort of veil of uncertainty, which is classic Neptune. This is classic Neptune. So duty, delusion in a square. Neptune, delusion, Saturn, duty. When they come to a square to each other, we have a conflict that requires a point of decision. That's what's called a pinch point. Anybody who's ever been to a psychologist, they talk about pinch points. Pinch points are where two people come to, and this is what diplomacy is all about, which is also a very strong word for Saturn. Diplomacy is coming to a point in time where a decision must be made. Do we go up and do we go left? This is where it's a mathematical, architectural construct that requires resolution. What's interesting about it is that when we take all of those characteristics of Saturn, duty, all the characteristics of Neptune, delusion, illusion, fantasy, all of when we take those two ideas, we see them being perfectly represented by the two individual main characters on the political stage today. I'm trying to present an idea for you here that allows you to understand why we are where we are. Now, when we take those characters and we put them into the chart of the United States, everything has a chart. And as long as you know the birth, so the United States birth, as I mentioned before, 5:08 p.m., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, July 4, 1776, that puts Sagittarius on the ascendant. A lot of astrologers don't like that chart, but I think the majority of people would argue, if it depends upon what your views are, we see a very, very strong characteristic of Sagittarius as he is on the ascendant, because what is on the ascendant is kind of what the person or the individual or the entity expresses to the world. The United States is very much of a Sagittarian kind of country. We're free-spirited, we're a melting pot, we're setting courses, we're sort of the great social experiment. And this is a perfect place where you would see this. This is why I firmly believe that Sagittarius is the rising sign of the United States, because it is so apt. And it's pertinently apropos as we enter into this political season. Now, when the time comes and we see the debates, we're going to be seeing duty talking to delusion. And how is that going to happen? How does those two manifest? Who wins that battle? That is the great question. Who wins that battle? I think the battle will be won by wherever Saturn is ultimately in the chart of the United States. The United States is at a critical point where we must decide. We must go left, we must go right, we must go up, we must go down, we must reach out, or we must pull back. These are the constructs. These are the ideas that we see rolling out on our political stages, if you know what I'm talking about. Again, this is not a view of me. This is simply an archetypal, astrological, philosophical view of what history is providing for us now. When we look back at this time as an astrologer, we will be able to see these two archetypal characteristics, symbolic of a particular human trait. So vote with your conscience. We know that this is a time of enormous change. What the things that we do now are going to manifest down the road. They're going to affect our children, our grandchildren. Duty has to prevail. This is the most obvious end.